welcome to the Carl Jackson Show podcast, your daily dose of objective truth in a world of confusion and lies. Guys, obviously, we're in an election cycle, the presidential election cycle, and it is going to be a fun year. We just found out that Joe Biden is going to debate Trump, allegedly, wink, wink. We'll see what happens if that does occur. But I wanted to talk to my guest today. His name is Sean Fleetwood. He's a columnist at The Federalist, and he writes some great stuff at The Federalist, so make sure that you check out his work. But there was an article that really got me a couple of weeks ago that he wrote called 10 Lies Democrats Tell About Our Elections and How to Refute Them. And I really think this is important. I think a lot of us aren't used to being activists, if you will, on the right. And I think that the left are often brainwashed and or trained to kind of be activists, even when they're not, even when they're just regular laymen. And so I think it's important when the brainwashed left have all of these talking points ready to go, you have a way, or you have some words that you can use to refute them. And that's exactly why we have Sean on. So Sean, welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show podcast. It's been a while since we've had you on.
It's good to be here. Thanks so much for having me back.
All right, absolutely. So, Sean, if we can, let's just go through these. You say that there's 10 lies Democrats tell about our elections and how you can refute them. And I just want you to just kind of help train us up, because I think it's already a crazy election cycle. We see the lawfare that's happening with former President Donald Trump. And there's no doubt in my mind, if he wins, there's going to be more allegations that the election was stolen by Russia or someone else, or if he loses and there are any type of shenanigans, and if we try to talk about those shenanigans, we're going to end up jailed or mocked or both. So anyway, let's go through these one at a time. Number one, election integrity laws suppress voters. That is absolutely ludicrous and insane. But I'd love to get your take on, when Democrats say, having fair elections, having election integrity, making sure that everything is above board actually suppresses voters.
Yeah, so a lot of what you're seeing now is Republican-controlled legislatures, governors sign into law basically election integrity measures that just revert election laws back to what they were before the 2020 election. So you recall in the lead up to that election, you had numerous states that expanded the use of mass mail-in voting, unsupervised ballot drop boxes, things like that. And so a lot of these laws are just returning us to that pre-COVID normal. And instituting basic requirements like voter ID when you go to cast a ballot. And of course, Democrats have been absolutely unhinged in calling these laws suppressive, that they suppress voters, particularly if you're a non-white voter, that somehow you can't figure out how to get an ID. And of course, there's never been any evidence to suggest that these claims are true. You've had numerous courts, places like New Hampshire, Ohio, where you've had Democrat Democrat-aligned attorneys challenge these laws, and courts just throw out the lawsuits saying there's no basis for these lawsuits whatsoever to claim that they suppress anyone's vote. I think the best example that I can give is Georgia. Georgia passed what's called SB 202, which was a very benign election integrity law back in the spring of 2021, included things like voter ID for mail-in voting and absentee voting, very basic benign provisions. And Democrats just went ballistic. I mean, Joe Biden compared it to the Jim Crow, is what he called it, the modern Jim Crow. You had MLB pulled out their All-Star game out of Atlanta to protest. You had Delta, Coca-Cola, these other Georgia-based companies that criticized it. And what ended up happening in the 2022 midterms is you had record early voting turnout, and you actually had a poll that was commissioned by the University of Georgia after that election showing that 0% of Black voters in Georgia reported having a poor experience while they were voting during that election. So there's never been any evidence whatsoever to suggest that these laws suppress anyone, let alone non-white voters.
Sean, I got to ask you, because I get so frustrated. The left is really good at using language and shaping narratives. Republicans aren't so much. And it's really, we're in a season in America where the right has to really get much better at shaping narratives, using effective language, so on, et cetera. Did you write this column because you're sick of seeing just weak Republicans that don't seem to refute? these narratives? Because I got to be honest with you, Sean. I don't. I think I gravitated towards this column simply because I don't hear Republicans talking about election integrity enough. I don't know if they're scared of being branded some J6er or something like that, but I don't hear it, and I'm like, this is insane. We've got to make sure that our elections are secure. Otherwise, this isn't America.
Yeah, and Democrats in the media are always going to compare you to the most extreme thing possible anyway. So why are you staying
So
silent?
true.
And the thing is that, for Republicans, it's almost like a taboo topic. Like, oh, we can't touch on that because of what happened on January 6th. But there are legitimate, verifiable issues with our elections that do need to be addressed and that voters have, just concerns over. So I think for Republicans to continue to ignore this issue is quite shameful. And the fact that here we are, almost 4 years after the 2024 election, and Republicans still do not know how to talk about this issue, it's pretty embarrassing. And that's part of the reason for the article. One of the things we like to say at the Federalist is we provide air cover for our allies on the ground. And so basically, what this article I'm hoping does is give these talking points to not just election officials, but everyday Americans to push back when they're confronted with Democrat lies about our election system.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I think every person, from politician to myself, my next door neighbor, anyone that is considers themselves a patriot, a Republican, conservative, even libertarian, you have to be ready for this stuff because the left is going to come at you, and they train their voters. I mean, you can go to the most ghetto fabulous person on the street, Sean, and the most ghetto fabulous person on the street that doesn't pay any attention to politics and just votes Democrat because they're black, because they've done it all their life, they're going to have the talking points down because that's all they hear, whether it's on MSNBC, CNN, on TikTok, or wherever they may be getting the information. And so we've got to be able to refute this stuff. And I think one of the frustrations that I have, Sean, as a black guy, I get so sick and tired of the Republican Party saying, wait a minute, you Democrats, you fools are the racist. I mean, it's insane to insult blacks and say that blacks can't come up with IDs. I mean, I grew up in the hood. I didn't know anybody without an ID. It's insane. I don't understand why there's no pushback on this. I'm being a bit redundant here, but it's just so frustrating to me. So that's why I appreciate this column. Let's do this. Let's move on to number 2. We have 3 minutes before we take a break here. And again, I'm joined by Sean Fleetwood of the Federalist. You can check him out at Sean Fleetwood on X. He spells Sean SHAWN. Fleetwood, I think, is self-explanatory. All right, so make sure you check him out and check out his articles on the Federalist. He's a really good writer and very prolific. I mean, I just looked him up again this morning, and I didn't realize that he had written 1,000 columns in the last 2 weeks. It's insane. I'm being somewhat exaggerative, but he writes a lot. All right. The second one, the 2020 election was the most secure in American history. I've recently heard Joe Biden say this not too long ago. Again here, Sean. So was the 2020 election the most secure election in American history? What should conservatives, how should they respond to that?
Well, I mean, whatever Joe Biden says is true, right? I mean, that's basically what the media says all the time. But of course not. That's the classic trope that gets thrown out there by Democrats in the media. But of course, this was not the most secure election in our history. You had various problems with it, where you had Democrat election officials, places like Michigan, where they basically unilaterally, without the approval of the legislature, told local election officials, don't bother with signature verification. That's not necessarily something that needs to be done. In places like Pennsylvania, you had some similar actions that were taken by the executive branch without the approval of the legislature as well. In a state like Wisconsin, you had the state Supreme Court rule in the summer of 2022 that the use of ballot drop boxes during the 2020 election violated state law and basically prohibited their use from future elections. And of course, that's likely to be overturned now that the state has a Democrat majority on the Supreme Court. So it's likely that we'll have ballot drop boxes back for Wisconsin in 2024. But these are just changes to our election system. We're not even talking about the big tech censorship that took place during that election, where you had Twitter and Facebook limited the sharing and your ability to see the New York Post's Hunter Biden laptop story in the weeks that was published. Before the 2020 election. And, that was done at the behest of agencies like the FBI, which had authenticated that laptop as early as late of 2019, but then spent the months leading up to the 2020 election going to big tech platforms like Twitter and Facebook, warning about so-called hack and leak operations and misinformation being published by Russian actors, basically giving them a nod and a wink like, hey, we have this story coming down the pipeline. We're going to need you to censor it. And of course, that's exactly what these tech companies did. And then you had the letter that was put out after the New York Post story came to fruition by these former Intel officials,
right,
claiming that this laptop had all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. Well, we now know that the CIA reportedly solicited signatures for that letter. And we
Sean,
had
just for the sake of time, let's stop it right there. We'll be back more with Sean Fleetwood after the break. All right, welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show. Again, I'm joined by my guest, Sean Fleetwood of the Federalist, and we'll get right back to him. But first, I want to talk to you about wealth protection research. At the very heart of our democracy lies a principle that we hold sacred, and that is free speech. It's the cornerstone that supports every freedom that we cherish, allowing ideas to flourish, debates to ignite, and progress to be made. Without it, our pursuit of liberty, our ability to challenge, and our capacity to innovate would be severely constrained. Yet in today's digital age, the very platform that should democratize information is being used to narrow the spectrum of ideas we're exposed to. Important discussions about our wealth, our rights, and our future are being systematically silenced or overshadowed in mainstream narratives, leaving many feeling voiceless in conversations that are crucial to our financial independence and our security. This is where wealth protection research steps in. They're armed with a mission that's never been more critical. Wealth protection research is not a financial advisory firm. They are defenders of free speech. They are committed to giving a voice to the silence in an era where dialogues about retirement, investments, and economic freedoms are increasingly censored. Wealth protection research is focused on ensuring that diverse, controversial, and revolutionary ideas have a platform. Wealth protection research tirelessly seeks out the financial experts, the thought leaders, and the trailblazers who have been pushed to the margins by mainstream media and tech platforms like Facebook and Google. These are the voices that challenge prevailing narratives, offering fresh, often contrarian perspectives on protecting and growing your wealth, especially as we navigate the uncertainties of the 2024 election. By spotlighting these thinkers like Jim Rickards and Porter Stansberry, wealth protection research is not just sharing financial advice, they are fostering a movement towards a more open, informed, and free society. Wealth protection research has created a 2024 election wealth protection report. This free report highlights the 3 best ideas for protecting and growing your money heading into the 2024 election. It contains ideas the mainstream media won't touch, and listeners can get it completely free. All you have to do is text the word ideas, IDEAS, to 76626. Again, text ideas to 76626. Plus, if you text ideas today, you'll also get a free gold investment kit from Wealth Protection Research, sponsored by Augusta Precious Metals. All right, guys, now I want to get back to my guest, Sean Fleetwood of the Federalist. John, before we went to the break, you were talking about the 51, I believe it was, what do you call these people, in the basically set the Hunter Biden laptop story in the intelligence community. It said the Hunter Biden laptop story was just more Russia collusion, basically.
Yeah, and now we know that the CIA had reportedly solicited signatures for that letter. We also know that the Biden campaign, now Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and then working on the Biden campaign, was in contact with officials at the CIA about getting signatures for this letter. So, I mean, that's just par for the course when it comes to the many issues plaguing the 2020 election.
Yeah, and this is stuff that, again, I want you guys to be informed on because you're going to have to push back and it's going to require us being activists. It's got to be, the left, again, a lot of their voters are brainwashed. They come up with these talking points and these slogans that the left will just share all over social media and on television and all of this kind of stuff. And before you know it, I mean, your crackhead on the local corner, or not local corner, but your crackhead down the street at the liquor store are repeating the same narratives. So you've got to be ready. Sean, we were speaking briefly during the break, and one of the things that I'm concerned about and why I'm so thankful for this column is I really believe that Republicans, I don't know what we're up to, but I feel like we're kind of repeating the same mistakes that we made in 2022. When basically we were just look at the polls, look at the polls, look at the polls, and I got to tell you, when I do look at the polls do look promising. Where I'm like, okay, I mean, if you do believe the polls, Trump is leading in 5 of the 6 swing states, and that seems to be that's great and all. But we underperformed severely in 2022. We underperformed severely in special elections. Should we expect something different because it's a presidential election cycle?
I would not expect anything different unless the Republican get out the vote operations actually change. So you mentioned the 2022 midterms. Republicans barely got a House majority. Every Democrat senator that was running for reelection, every Democrat governor, with the exception of Steve Sisolak in Nevada, that was running for election, ended up winning. And the polls were wildly off. In fact, the only two contested races in that whole election where Republicans actually outperformed their expected margins was in Florida with the reelection of Governor Ron DeSantis and Senator Marco Rubio. The 2023 special elections, it was a very similar thing where you had 538 put out a study analysis in September of 2023 showing that every major of all the special elections that had occurred up until that point, Democrats not only won the vast majority of them, but vastly outperformed their expected margins. We also saw that in the November elections where Democrats took control of the General Assembly in Virginia. They won the Kentucky's gubernatorial race. They enshrined abortion into Ohio's constitution. Republicans did so bad that we were left to brag about Mississippi's governor winning re-election by a little more than 3 points in a state that Donald Trump won by 16 points in 2020. So it's just been one, crap show after the next. And I think we often discount the Democrat election machine, what I like to call it, because it's just this vast enterprise of money funding left-wing nonprofits that are targeting demographics that are favorable to Democrats, minority voters, college-educated women, young people, college students. And then I think we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but the Biden bucks and using the federal government to register voters that are likely to vote for Democrats. So it's just this vast enterprise that the Democrats have created through the years that has now been only accelerated thanks to the expansion of mail-in voting. And Republicans just do not have anything comparable to that to compete with it. And until that changes, we should continue to expect to lose elections.
Let me ask you, since we're talking about this, does the blame lie at the feet of former RNC chair Ronna McDaniel, or is it a much bigger problem than that when it comes to the get out the vote effort for the Republican Party? I think right now, Laura Trump, I know, and the new gentleman, I forget his name, over the RNC are ramping things up. I know they brought Scott Pressler in to help out a little bit. So I'm hoping things will get better, but it's a little late in the season.
Yeah, that's the thing. And, do I think Ronna deserves blame? Absolutely. I think a lot of people within the Republican leadership, including President Trump to a certain degree, who backed her when she was up against Harmeet Dillon. So I think it's across the board. And I think a big problem is also donor education, right? Open Secrets, which kind of analyzes the flow of money in elections, analyzed the 2022 midterms, and they essentially found that not a majority, but a substantial amount of Republican donor money went to things like consulting fees and consultants. And meanwhile, you have Democrat millionaires and billionaires that are pouring their money into these nonprofits that are registering demographics that are likely to pull the lever at the ballot box for their party. And, Hayden Ludwig over at Restoration News, they've done a lot of great research showing that a lot of the money in elections, Republicans spend generally anywhere from like less than 1% on these actual effective get out the vote efforts and things
What?
like that. Yeah, so it's crazy, just the disparity of not even being there on the battlefield. We're not even playing the same game as Democrats are when it comes to our elections.
So maybe, I mean, because I've heard arguments. Listen, we lost because of abortion. We lost because, and but I don't necessarily believe that. But I mean, if the issue is we're just, as you said, we're not even getting on the battlefield when it comes to the get out the vote effort. That is just absolutely insane. Because I think when you talk to most people one on one, I would argue, Sean, that probably 70% of voters actually agree with you and I more than they would people on the left. I just don't think they're hearing our arguments enough. All right, so and we'll come back to some of these things. Again, I'm speaking to Sean Fleetwood of the Federalist. We're talking about his column, 10 Lies Democrats Tell About Our Elections and How to Refute Them. That's important. We only have a minute and a half left in this block. Man, time is flying. But I want to talk about this one, going on to number 3. Voter fraud doesn't exist. All right. This is what the Democrat Party is saying now, Sean. How do you respond?
Well, I mean, there obviously is voter fraud happening, and the media just chooses not to acknowledge it when it happens. I mean, you've had some very recent examples, Louisiana sheriff's race that came down to one vote, and then actually found out there were 11 illegal votes, and a judge ended up ordering a new election. Similar thing that happened in Bridgeport, Connecticut. You had a woman who was a city employee that was affiliated with the incumbent governor's campaign caught on video stuffing a ballot box with ballots. And so a local judge in Connecticut ordered a new election, a new primary election. And so, of course, none of these stories have been made big news by Democrat media because that goes against the narrative that they've been feeding since 2020, which is that voter fraud never happens, it's completely rare, and that you should just continue to pretend that everything is, ripe and happy with our election system.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing, especially given all of the outrage that the left had in 2020, no, 2000 with George W. Bush, in 2016 with Trump. It's absolutely insane for them to say such things. The fact that Stacey Abrams talked about, winning Georgia and Hillary Clinton. I mean, all of the gripes that they had, even John Kerry, it's insane. Anyway, back with more. I'm speaking to Sean Fleetwood of the Federalist. Stay tuned. All right, welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show podcast. You can find me online, all things social media, at the Carl Jackson Show is where you can go to find us. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you go to get your podcast. The Carl Jackson Show is where you can find us. Also, YouTube and Rumble. If you're afraid of censorship or you don't want to be concerned about censorship, make sure you subscribe to our Rumble page. We would certainly appreciate that. Again, I'm joined by my guest, Sean Fleetwood of the Federalist, and we're talking about the 10 lies Democrats tell about our elections and how you can refute them. And I really think this is important. I really think that if we're going to, I believe we're living in a post-constitutional, post-Christian America. And if we're going to turn back the hands of time, so to speak, I think this is a generational fight. And I think that every single American that loves this country is going to have to become an activist. And that means it doesn't mean that you're going to be, I don't know, the next Charlie Kirk or something like that, or a Scott Pressler, or but sometimes it's just having the right language, knowing how to refute the left's arguments. And so that's what we're doing here. Number 4, Sean, one that you write about in your column. And again, find Sean online on X at Sean Fleetwood. He spells Sean SHAWN, and check out his columns at the Federalist. I'm always impressed, Sean. I look at you and you look like you just graduated college yesterday. And then, I mean, honestly, it looks like you just got out of high school yesterday, if I'm being honest. But I read your columns and I'm like, how does this kid know so much? I mean, his columns are so good. I encourage you to check them out. All right, so election workers are under siege. So you start off here by saying, as America edges closer to the 2024 election, Democrats are ramping up their attacks on election oversight on an almost weekly basis. Regime-approved media outlets run article after article lamenting an alleged wave of quote-unquote threats against election workers that they blame on Trump's 2020 election criticisms. So what are these so-called threats, Sean, to election workers?
Yeah, so just kind of as a primer, in the lead up to the 2022 midterms, you had this trend start where the media was putting out articles warning of this impending threat on election day that a bunch of, the insinuation being that a bunch of Republicans, MAGA, Trump supporters are going to show up and disrupt election day and cause all kinds of chaos in the 2022 midterms. Of course, that never happened. And there was no article or corrections issued by the media. But instead of acknowledging their faults, they continued to double and triple, quadruple down all throughout 2023 and all throughout 2024. And so oftentimes what they do is they've perpetuated this narrative, kind of going back to what I said, that a bunch of MAGA Republicans, that there's a coordinated effort nationwide where you have these individuals that are constantly on a regular basis threatening election officials throughout the country. And of course, there's never been any evidence to suggest that this is true. A lot of what the media relies upon is unsubstantiated statements from Democrat election officials. In fact, in some cases, when they interview some of these Democrats, they say, well, me and my office personally haven't experienced any threats, but we know that there's an increase in threats. And then they'll rely on surveys from far left institutions like the Brennan Center for Justice. But what's actually really interesting is Biden's own Department of Justice. They launched a elections threat hotline in 2021, yeah. And the following year, they put out statistics, updating the public on, the numbers that they had received. And they said of the roughly 1,100 calls that had been sent to the hotline, only about 11% actually warranted any type of investigation. And as of today, I believe less than 20 individuals throughout the entire country of 331 million people have actually been charged with any type of crime for threatening or harassing election workers. So there's absolutely no widespread conspiracy going on, but leave it to the media to continue to push the narrative.
Man, absolutely insane. All right, another issue is this. This is number 5 on the column. Ranked choice voting is fair, and I'm a little confused about ranked choice voting, but I do know, if I recall correctly, Sarah Palin was running for Congress back in Alaska, and I think she was going to win, except for this ranked choice voting that kind of kicked her out of the process. Explain to the listeners how ranked choice voting works, and what do we need to say to refute this stuff, because it's really confusing.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head. It's confusing. A lot of people don't understand it because it's so complex, and that's why it's so bad for elections. So in ranked choice voting, what happens is rather than just select one candidate, vote, and you're done, you rank candidates in order of preference, right? So let's say you have 4 candidates on a ballot, candidates A, B, C, and D, and you decide you want to put candidate C first, and then whatever that follows. If in the first round of voting, if no candidate gets more than 50% of the vote, the candidate that receives the least amount of votes is kicked out. They're done. And so then we go to round 2. And again, if no candidate receives more than 50% of the vote, we go to round 3. And this process continues until one candidate gets more than 50% of the vote. But part of the reason why it's so disenfranchising is, let's say that you go into the ballot box and again, you select candidate C first. Well, in the first round of voting, no candidate gets more than 50% of the vote, but candidate C got the least amount of votes. Well, now your first choice, the candidate that you actually wanted to vote for, is kicked out. So now we go to your second choice. So the idea that your vote is going towards someone that you actually support, it's just not present in a ranked choice voting system. And you mentioned the Alaska special House election. We now have a Democrat that is representing Alaska's at-large congressional district because of ranked choice voting. Sarah Palin, the Republican candidates actually collectively got more, or almost 60% of the vote in the first round of voting in that special House election. But because of ranked choice voting, now we have a Democrat that is representing that seat.
And this is what the left would like to expand around the country. It's just absolutely insane. Honestly, any red state should outlaw this. This shouldn't even be. I mean, this shouldn't even be up for discussion anywhere where we have a governor in place. Republicans have a governor in place. All right, moving on to number 6. Contingent electors are fake and unlawful. You say after Arizona Democrat AG Chris Mays released an indictment alleging 18 Republicans illegally participated in a so-called fake elector scheme Media hacks are once again using this dishonest terminology to characterize Trump's challenging of the 2020 election results as unlawful and unprecedented. And there we go again, Sean. The left is so good at just creating these narratives, a fake elector scheme, and then that's the narrative that gets put out, and then I'll even hear like a Fox News or something. Well, they'll say the narrative without correcting the narrative, which is the craziest thing to me.
Yeah, it's all about manipulating language, and the left is extremely good at that. I wish the right got better at that, but we'll see about that. But as far as the so-called fake elector scheme, this is something that was even recently repeated during oral arguments on the Trump immunity case by Justice Sonia Sotomayor. Which is this notion that because Trump electors cast their votes for Trump in the lead up to the 2020 after the 2020 election, that somehow this was illegal and unprecedented. But none about what the Trump people did after the 2020 election was illegal or unprecedented. In fact, in states like Georgia, it very much closely mirrors what happened in the 1960 election with JFK and Richard Nixon. So in Hawaii, there was a dispute about who won the state's electoral votes, and the acting Republican governor at the time had certified the electoral votes for Richard Nixon. But there was a big dispute over, again, who won the state actually, and the Kennedy people filed a lawsuit. While this was going on, both the Kennedy electors, Nixon electors cast their respective votes, and lo and behold, the court ended up overturning the results of that election to where the electoral votes ended up going to Kennedy. And so because the Kennedy electors had cast their votes, that means they were in place for certification. And the same thing happened again in the 2020 election in states like Georgia. And in fact, I reported last year that according to this transcript, you have conversations between one of the electors and a Trump attorney saying, if we don't do this, that means that our electors won't be in place should a court overturn Georgia's election results. And the Trump attorney's like, yeah, we're doing this to ensure that the will of the people of Georgia is upheld should a court overturn the results of the election. And so nothing about what they did was illegal or unprecedented. But again, leave it to the media to continue to lie to the public.
Absolutely amazing. All right, we have just a minute left in this segment, but we'll get started on it. ERIC is nonpartisan, ERIC being the Electronic Registration Information Center. If you want to start on that, 1 minute left in this block.
Yeah, I'll just kind of give a quick primer about what ERIC is. And so it stands for the Electronic Registration Information Center. It was founded by David Becker, who formerly worked at the DOJ. It's very far left. His colleagues said he's someone who is very much animus towards conservatives. And basically, ERIC is an organization that was sold to states as a way to clean up their voter rolls. But in many ways, it actually just inflates voter rolls and often requires states to contact what are called EBUs, eligible but unregistered voters, to register them to vote. And so on the surface, it appears as if it's this nonpartisan organization, but its connections to another left-wing nonprofit is something that the media will continue to ignore. And we can discuss that after the break.
All right. Well, again, we're speaking to Sean Fleetwood of The Federalist. We've got a few more. Again, we're talking about his column, 10 Lies Democrats Tell About Our Elections. ERIC is number 7. We'll continue with that after the break and also tackle numbers 8, 9, and 10. And also tell you how former President Barack Obama in part is to blame about all this anti-Semitism we see on college campuses. We'll be back. All right, welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show. Guys, this segment is brought to you by MyPillow.com. Right now at MyPillow, they have a $25 extravaganza. They've got so much on sale for $25. It's insane. You know, Mike Lindell, the big box stores have canceled him. But the good news is he's making all of these savings. He's sending them directly to you. You can give them a call at 800-858-0263. Use my name, Carl, C-A-R-L. I don't spell it like the communists. All right. Or just go to mypillow.com, click on that radio podcast square and enter my name, Carl. From their My Slippers to the My Pillow with the Giza fabric on it to a dish towel set to bath towel set. $25 extravaganza at mypillow.com. Take advantage of it. All right, back with my guest, Sean Fleetwood of the Federalist. You were explaining before we went to the break the ERIC system. Sean, again, the Electronic Registration Information Center that was developed by a commie, basically, that used to work for the that used to work for the DOJ. So if you want to wrap that up, that'd be great.
Yeah, so again, ERIC requires its member states to contact eligible but unregistered voters. And so, what the media will never tell you, given that a lot of Republican led states have been withdrawing, is that ERIC has a very alarming connection to a group known as the Center for Election Innovation and Research, or CARE, which is another Becker founded group, Becker being the guy who founded ERIC. And the thing about CARE, if you recall, it's one of the two nonprofits that received tens of millions of dollars from Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg that poured funds, Zuckbucks we call them, into local election offices throughout the country in the lead up to the 2020 election to advance Democrat-backed voting policies. So CARE and ERIC have an active relationship where ERIC will send the data, voter roll data it receives from states to CARE. CARE will then craft these lists of voters that these states should target. And then ERIC gives that list that CARE has curated back to the states to contact these voters. So you have a highly partisan left-wing organization, CARE, that is working with ERIC, that is then giving that data set to states to contact. And we can only assume that these voters are likely to vote for Democrats.
You know, and I got to tell you, the advantage that the left has over the Republican Party, over conservatives, are they're willing to be dishonest. They're willing to do beyond being organized. They're willing to do whatever it takes to win. And if that means lying, if that means developing, this system that where they deceptively tell you they're going to take care of the voter rolls and make sure they're updated. And then it's a get out the vote effort, or registering voters. I mean, they're just willing to lie, and it's something that we don't have in us. All right, so moving on, I want to make sure that we get to these three and also touch on Barack Obama, because I do believe that I don't believe there will be a Joe Biden presidency without Barack Obama. I don't believe the country would be in as bad a shape as it is without Barack Obama. That isn't to say that there weren't some, George W. Bush. Anyway, topic for another day, but I want to make sure we get to that as well. All right. The left will claim that mail-in voting is secure and it's reliable. Also, Democrats are the party of democracy. I want to touch on all of these. And then Biden's federal election takeover is just a nonpartisan outreach effort. Wow, that is a whopper. But let's start with number 8. Mail-in voting is secure and reliable. Is that the truth, Sean?
No, it's not the truth. And in fact, several media outlets like NBC News, CBS News have put out articles indicating that it's not true. They've put out articles in the past few weeks, lamenting how there are delays in the mail system. The rampant postal theft that is going on has continued to increase. And so it really begs the question, how can you claim that mail-in voting is secure when you have all of these problems with the mail system that the media themselves are admitting?
I mean, this is and listen. I mean, this stuff is so common sense. I mean, obviously, when it comes to mail-in voting, chain of custody is always going to be in question. God forbid, someone's mail could get lost, stolen. Who knows? I mean, it's just common sense to say mail-in voting is secure and reliable. It's just it absolutely makes no sense whatsoever. All right, so Democrats are the party of democracy. Yeah. All right. So, and they often claim, as you write here, you say Biden and Democrats love to contend that, quote, democracy is on the ballot, close quote, this November. This insinuation, of course, is that the Republic, as we know it, will collapse if Trump and Republicans emerge victorious at the ballot box. Yet, for all their professed concerns about democracy, Democrats are doing everything in their power to destroy it. And honestly, Sean, I don't know. And again, I'm speaking of Sean Fleetwood of the Federalist. I don't know how they could say that democracy is on the ballot, or that Trump would be a dictator, given the fact, or that he won't leave office, as Robert De Niro said this week, when he's already left office once.
Yeah, and the fact that, they're actively trying to imprison their chief political opponent ahead of a
That
major
too.
election. It's just truly remarkable. And, they continuously talk about norms and, maintaining the republic when you have Joe Biden actively defying the US Supreme Court when it told him, no, you can't actually force taxpayers to subsidize college student loans, and yet he continues to double and triple down anyways, and try and skirt that ruling. So it's just absolutely remarkable, but also not surprising. Leftism, communism, whatever you want to call it, that's their religion. That's their pagan religion that they will follow to the grave, and they are fully committed to weaponizing it, and using the government to crush their political opponents through whatever means necessary.
Yeah, I mean the times that we're living in now. I've been on air in some way, shape, or form, mostly local radio, for approximately 10 years now, and I got to tell you, I would talk about things the left would do, particularly Barack Obama when he was in office, and I would always give these, scenarios, the ultimate scenario, what this could lead to, and even then, I couldn't comprehend. I just couldn't comprehend it. Now I see where we are in America, and while how again, just as you say, I mean, the left are literally with these sham hearings trying to jail the man, in former President Donald Trump. It's absolutely insane. I did not think they would go this far. Man, how stupid was I? I mean, this is communism. All right. Number 10, Biden's federal election takeover is just a nonpartisan outreach effort. And this is one of the deals that really concerns me because Joe Biden is using the federal government at his disposal as a get out the vote machine. And I really don't hear enough conservatives talking about it, frankly, besides yourself, Sean.
Yeah, so just kind of as a background, in March of 2021, Biden signed this executive order 14019 that basically mandated hundreds of federal agencies engage in get out the vote efforts and voter registration. And it's important to point out, of course, that Congress never authorized the executive to use funds in this manner for any of these agencies. But of course, that leave it to Democrats to break the norms, right? And so basically, what this order did was, in addition to mandating that agencies engage in these efforts, they also had to collaborate with what they described to be nonpartisan third party groups. But of course, in the years since its implementation, you've had good government groups, conservative media that have discovered that a lot of these so called nonpartisan groups are extremely left wing. So we're talking about groups like Demos, like the ACLU, Democrat aligned groups that absolutely support leftist causes. And at every chance, the administration has stonewalled requests for documents. These agencies were required to develop what's called a strategic plan discussing how they intended to implement Biden's order. They've refused to turn over these documents, even when courts have ordered them to do so, and they've heavily redacted documents that they have released. And you're right, not enough Republicans are talking about it. Fortunately, you have a lawsuit out of Pennsylvania that was filed by members of the legislature there challenging the legality of this order. But I fear that, it's a little too late because now we're almost at the 2024 election. This order has been in implementation for 3 years now, and Lord knows how many likely Democrat voters they've registered in that time period.
Yeah, I mean, it's Hugh Hewitt says if the elections aren't close, they can't cheat. But you have to understand that Democrats have a machine out. It's why I don't get all giddy about the polls. We have got to get out the vote. We've got to make sure that we show up. And if there's anybody that is out there that are, maybe you're not as inspired as you were in 2020, even 2022. 2016, get out anyway. Otherwise, I really do believe that that we're going to lose this country. Just real quick, we only have a minute, which we had more time with you, Sean Fleetwood of the Federalist. Barack Obama and the anti-Semitism that we see on college campuses today. Make the connection for us, if you could.
Yeah, Barack Obama really, I think, started and mainstreamed the radicalism that you see within the Democrat Party, and especially the tolerance for anti-Semitism. This is a man whose former pastor, Reverend Jeremiah Wright, made very anti-Semitic remarks, and is someone who actually basically said during a sermon in the days after 9/11 that the United States, because of our foreign policy, basically had 9/11 coming. You've had other numerous anti-Semites that have surrounded themselves with Barack Obama. His former girlfriend, who actually proposed to numerous times, accused him of downplaying anti-Semitism and promoting Black nationalism. And so, I mean, and that doesn't even include his policy towards Israel and what we saw during the 8 years of Obama. So he's really mainstreamed this radicalism that you see within the Democrat Party that has set the stage for people like Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and the fact that people like that are allowed to exist within the Democrat Party as elected officials. That's all thanks to Barack Obama.
All right. Sean Fleetwood of the Federalist, we have to leave it there. We appreciate your time. Don't grow weary doing good, guys. God bless you.